Welcome everybody to this RadPod breaking news exclusive with Milo V. He is our very official media correspondent, I should say. Milo, we're very happy to have you back. This entire breaking news special is basically about what you are not getting on Fox quote unquote news. Some nuclear court documents dropped a few days ago revealing Fox perpetuating a big lie that they knew was a big lie, from their anchor hacks top and bottom to the owner of the network to their CEO. And Milo, what are people not getting on Fox News right now that they need to be informed about?
There's a lot there. So let's start with kind of how we're thinking of Fox. We're thinking of Fox as a propaganda factory. It is not a source of useful information for its viewers. It engages them. It provides community. Importantly, we know strategically in classic propaganda strategies, it actually prevents people from seeking other sources of information. So it creates an isolating source and tells people not to seek out other sources. But most importantly, it actually is a threat to democracy and basically allows people to live somewhat independent of the world around them. So we say Fox propaganda factory creates an unreality. So when we see those videos of someone online at a Trump event who seems to be just saying things that seem incredulous and incompatible, nearly flat earth-like, those people's minds have been targeted by weaponized disinfo to believe things that are unreal. So
absolutely. And tell me what we're looking at here. One of the things you're involved in, obviously, is the Media and Democracy Project. I say obviously because you've been a guest before. Anybody who has not seen episode 38, please refer to it. But tell us what we're looking at here.
So our organization thinks a lot about how information, news organizations create and shape narratives and inform our fellow Americans. And we've recognized, as have other groups, that the Fox information ecosystem is actually very dangerous. I think one of the more obvious examples until recently was disinformation about the pandemic. Literally, there were somewheres of 99% of Tucker Carlson shows in the early part of the vaccination era of the COVID pandemic. Tucker Carlson undermined vaccines, 99% of his episodes. That's a public health threat. So that's one form of disinformation around the reality around a life-threatening virus and a solution or a preventive public health strategy. But what we've started to do and tried to help as part of our work in the Media and Democracy Project is to get people to understand that, yes, you can see these enraging clips of Tucker Carlson spouting racist, weaponized disinformation to enrage viewers of the Fox ecosystem. But there's someone who's actually responsible for that. There's someone who pays Tucker's salary, and that's Rupert Murdoch. And Rupert Murdoch has a very sordid history on 3 continents of using media, using his power as a media oligarch, to use those different organizations, different strategies to create political power. Right. So one of the things that commonly in circles is people are becoming increasingly aware of the harms and hazards of weaponized propaganda, especially of the Rupert Murdoch type, is that it is not just for dollars and cents. Yes, he is motivated by riches and treasure, but this man has made it very clear that he has political aims. And so it's very important as we start thinking about some of the solutions to decrease the influence of this oligarch, that we start thinking about what his ultimate strategies are, and that may provide us with some of the solutions.
Thank you for that. For those who don't know the details of the court docs that dropped from Dominion Voting Systems, which is suing Fox and all of the corporate elements of Fox for defamation in a I believe it's $6 billion lawsuit. Some internal documents were released alleging that the anchors such as Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, who you see here, did not believe the lies that were coming out of the Trump camp, the Sidney Powells, the Rudy Giulianis. According to the correspondents, they made fun of them. They also, by the same token, there were correspondence between Hannity and Carlson wishing to get somebody fired who worked for the network who was trying to fact check Trump. And then there was Rupert Murdoch weighing in, saying maybe we should get these three henchmen together and have them admit that Biden won. Well, we all know that never happened. We all know that there was a violent coup. And we look at the rhetoric coming out of this network and looking at these internal documents and seeing that according to them, it was known that the Sidney Powells and the Giulianis were promoting false narratives. And yet they looked at it as a bottom line thing, according to the docs, worried that they were going to lose their viewership to Newsmax because they'd radicalized so many of their viewers to be addicted to this outrage that they're continually selling. And what does that tell you as somebody who has devoted much of your time in the last few years to critiquing corporate media?
So absolutely. So there's several things just I'd like to add to Rupert Murdoch's influence. Is it is most tangible and now most evident with these recent court documents you mentioned, that it comes through the ecosystem of Fox. Rupert Murdoch is building a mammoth information ecosystem around his Fox brand. There's a streaming platform of Fox Nation, which has syndicated columnists, podcasts, streaming original content. He's creating different targeted group content, something called Fox Soul, ostensibly to engage the Black community of America, and in the Fox network. Fox Weather, because everyone actually does need weather. Obviously, Fox Sports, FX, and something that I think will eventually, and maybe you'll have me back another time, I think we need to talk about in the future, is a streaming service called Tubi, which doesn't carry the tagline or the Fox brand, but it is a wholly owned streaming network that is actually going to be a delivery system and is a delivery system right now, part of the Fox enterprises. So, and the most
that's really interesting because there's been no notification that Tubi is part of his empire.
It is. He purchased it. Just to give you some context, we could get into it now. They purchased the Fox purchased this, and for those who aren't, Tubi is basically a streaming platform. It's an ad subsidized streaming platform,
right,
that you can watch reruns of your old favorite Westerns on, but you might have commercials. They have 2 or 3 channels devoted to like 70s shows. It's got content that's just all already created, and also some new content coming out, and it's now beginning to create its own content. So think of it as free streaming television, but now coming through your Wi-Fi, as opposed to your cable line or your antenna back in the day. The simpler way to think about this is they're basically recreating what we used to get over the air for free, but now streaming. So there's ad revenues to be generated by doing this. There are other companies doing it. Rupert Murdoch and Fox paid $440 million for this 4 years ago. They just declined an offer for $2 billion for Tubi. They clearly see value in this, not just so to make sure that Americans are entertained, but there's no doubt, looking at their platform and their structure, that they see this as not just revenue generating for their ultimate political agenda manifesting in the Fox enterprise, but you can certainly see circumstances where they might prioritize their Fox strategic kind of disinformation platforms on that network. So this is something that right now, we'll talk a little bit about the FCC shortly in the show. This is something that the FCC is wholly unprepared for. Things are moving very quickly. So, great segue.
Yeah.
Speaking of unprepared for,
so before this is actually perfect. Before we discuss this image right here, I just wrote something for my Substack, the Heidi Kuda, Betty Dangerous Substack, Fox is a Shithole Country. And the reason I titled it like that is I wanted to look at it like a actual island or country, that like a mass that could be cut out of our country because of all the harms that it has been doing year after year. And we saw that France got rid of RT and France got rid of Rumble. We got rid of RT, but RT still ends up on Rumble. So I wonder if they are looking at the potential of perhaps a time when we grow enough moxie in this country to actually get rid of Fox, if they are looking at how they're going to still inject this poison by going streaming or going online. So I wonder if that isn't a factor. Certainly it's something worth
I definitely like the idea, but I'll tell you practically the way we function and the way the status of our current telecommunications legal environment and regulatory environment. A couple of things that commonly come up are these antidotes to Fox. Is bringing back the fairness doctrine an option? The answer is no. That only applied to a very small subset of over-the-air broadcasting. It still applies to radio, so potentially there is some streaming of Fox content over airwaves, but it doesn't apply at all to Fox News, Fox Business, and the Fox Nation. Now that all content is going streaming, the FCC at present does not have a regulatory role, at least as currently written, because the regulations were written in such a time. So the concept of getting the FCC as a regulator of Fox News, personally, and as a group that we've thought a lot about this, we don't see that, unfortunately, as an actual solution. It is actually beginning to get advertisers, investment firms, and other folks to recognize that this is not just another media property, that this is a media property with an agenda. So, for example, the largest shareholders, Fox is actually a public traded corporation. The largest shareholder of Fox is Vanguard. People's pensions, municipal pensions they're the shareholders. So potentially that is the way to think about this. And there's a group called Stop Disinfo 24 on Twitter, defenders of democracy against disinformation, that have started some potential shareholder type pressures to start thinking of doing things in that regard.
That's amazing. What it reminds me of when I was in college, where our protest was trying to end apartheid through encouraging divesting. And we did it, and we won, and apartheid ended. So maybe it's going to take something like that, where the pressure is to pull that money out, because again, it's always about the bottom line. One thing I want to say before we do talk about this very important image right there is that there was a scandal, phone hack, News of the World scandal that occurred in the UK. And I had this debate recently with an editor of mine, because I looked at it as Rupert coming out unscathed. He said that was not the case because there were repercussions. But within a few years, his profits were doubled. So how do you think the Dominion lawsuit will play out? Because right now we're talking about it, but it's already falling off the front pages of those that are willing to cover it.
Yeah. In a nutshell, I think that there's a deal there would have to be a deal in the works, because if this actually goes to trial, that means all of the people who we just heard their explosive internal chats and communications have to testify under oath. Rupert Murdoch cannot afford that.
Okay. All right. So makes sense.
Can I offer an alternative, perhaps? Given the amount of weaponized disinformation that this man has oozed into our system, given the number of deaths that are directly attributable to his poisons, why is this man not on trial for crimes against humanity? He has destroyed families. He has killed grandfathers and grandmothers.
He's estranged a lot of families.
Well, and now on top of everything else, his networks are supporting the genocide in Ukraine. They're pro-Russia. And it's disturbing to me that we can all look at this as grown adults and see exactly what he's doing, and yet none of us are like, take this guy to task for what he's really doing. And that troubles me.
Rules are not written right now that can hold this man personally accountable for anything he's doing. But that's going to be a nice segue, is there is the potential for there to be a public mobilization. And one of the things that we're trying to emphasize is, when you see Tucker, look upstream. When you see Laura Ingraham, look upstream. When you see all of the white supremacy that's kind of pumped out of Fox, multiple channels and on social media and in the Twitter sphere, it's almost, those are his infantry. He's the general. And we have to start thinking of this as in the information world.
I love it.
It's the generals. And it's almost a distraction. That's why he's remained in the background, and he's remained unscathed. They're basically dispensable. Look at look O'Reilly. What happened to O'Reilly? He's still writing books out there, and he's going to be on the new Newsmax alternative, America First, by the way. But he basically was, jettisoned. Everybody's, is going to will fall before he falls. But that's our duty to literally bring him into the light.
And speaking of looking upstream, we are looking at two enablers of evil, if not perpetrators. And I wrote a pretty in-depth investigation called Unmusked for the Byline Times group, Byline Supplement. But for the most part, that story about him buying Twitter was just completely misrepresented in corporate media over and over and over again. I looked at it as a war on truth and an ability to put more evil, more disinformed insurrectionists, propagandists back on Twitter. And sure enough, we have this horrible cesspool that's occurred. And I'm sure you have, thoughts on that very subject, seeing the two of them together.
It was a gulp moment. It almost felt like a dunk in some way, a flex of sorts. I mean, that we know that these two men shape narrative, have incredible power around the world, and the two of them have not been a force for good. Net. Sure, we can definitely give props about Starlink in Ukraine, but his most recent undermining of the ability of Ukraine to use it to defend themselves militarily as a terms of service violation, when that's, I think invading another country, as Putin has done, is a pretty big term violation. So in any event, it's a big gulp to see these two information warriors and seeing what they're having there and what they're sharing besides watching a good game. On the Fox network, by the way.
Yeah,
I would just like to reiterate for our audience, and I haven't said this in a few episodes. If you go back in our older episodes, you'll hear it. But I would like to say that, of course, Elon Musk is a fucking problem.
Hi-Fi's been saying that for years, even before there was a growing awareness of just how much of a problem this man is. And I would point everybody to, we'll put it in the notes to please read my Unmusked story, because it is very much a war on truth and an interference with facts. Okay, this is an important quote.
So great. So one of the ways we think about this is we're a very action-oriented group. So we try and turn our rage, our fears, and our passions and patriotism into action. And so one of the people that inspires us and has really informed our work is named Bob McChesney. He's been a thought leader in the world of recognizing the importance of media ownership, public ownership of new media sources, of journalism. And this is his phrase that we've turned into a mantra of sorts, which is whatever your first issue of concern, reproductive rights, climate crisis, racial justice, income inequality, whatever your first issue of concern, media had better be your second, because without change in the media, progress in your primary area is far less likely. And we just think that's a yes. That
yeah,
to us.
Very much so.
Very important. We just had Jen Sanko on RadPod, who obviously, directed the brainwashing of my dad about her father being brainwashed by Fox News and Rush Limbaugh. And she opens, I think, right there on her website and her book, right there is that quote. So that is somebody we will be keeping an eye on, because he's written books that deliver that information that you just shared with us, Milo. Yeah. What are we looking at here?
So one of the things that we're doing, besides calling out and trying to get people to look upstream at the media oligarchs, is to also, what are some of the solutions? Well, some of the solutions are actually local. We need people to be better informed. We need people we also think of this as be immunized to disinformation. Imagine that Fox part-time viewer who kind of reads what's online and their Facebook page and watches Fox. Imagine they actually had a good source of information. Well, right. Simultaneously to the usurpation of power of the press by very few media outlets and corporate media outlets, and then malactors like Rupert Murdoch, has been a decimation of local journalism. The number of people, when you ask on a call of 50 people, how many of you pay for your local paper, or can you find something that you think is credible and worth investing in? And it's single digits at best right now, unfortunately. So one of the things that we're doing is to facilitate people to become aware there actually is good local news. And actually there are excellent local journalists. And it turns out they're just a little bit hard to find in the sea of the internet. So what we've done is we've put together a 50-state searchable interactive directory of local news sources. These aren't filled with pink slime or disinformation outlets run out of Macedonia. we've culled, our methods are on the website, and one of our leaders, Jonathan, has spent a heroic amount of time, literally, that's 1,000+ different outlets and their websites. You can
Great.
click on your state, sign up, invest in local journalists as well.
Yeah,
Our
right.
mantra is invest in your community, invest in local journalism, invest in your democracy.
Beautiful. I love it. I love it. And where does this live? Where can people find it?
Great. Tiny URL, tiny.cc local directory. And that'll
Beautiful.
springboard to our website. If you have any questions about, or you want to share this concept with someone, it shows why local journalism is important. There's tons of research to explain why this isn't just about get your local sports scores and local high school scores and local weather forecasts. It's actually holding local politicians accountable and building accountable media as well.
Right.
So that's what a lot of things you
Brilliant.
can do with that. So our mantra is explore, act, share, immunize folks to disinformation, and then spread the word about there is good local journalism out there and help fund it.
Congratulations on that too, because this is all grassroots stuff. And for those of you who want to follow the work of Milo, go ahead and first connect, I would say, on Twitter at Fix Media Now, because his group is the connective tissue to a lot of these groups that are doing similar work. And actually, many of them sprung up through watching Jen Sanko's film, The Brainwashing of My Dad, that actually gave people the ability to see what was actually happening on a mass level to those who watched Fox. All of a sudden, these liberal people who never had an unkind word to say about anybody were suddenly like angry, outraged. Suddenly the immigrants were the problem, and this was the problem, and the school boards were the problem, whatever it was. And changing the channel, supporting and paying for local journalism is a great idea. And I will say Substack for me has been a game changer, because I'm now supported by people who actually buy annual memberships so I can keep doing this work. And so there is some support. People are getting used to paying for information that they want. And I think it's time. It's time.
I think that's fantastic. I'd just like to chime in. I'm still workshopping it. I like to think about messaging personally on kind of activist concepts, but basically information diet is a thing. What you feed your mind, so help feed someone else's mind. One of our actions we propose in our newsletter is like, gift a subscription to a local paper. If your family's still in another town, like gift them a subscription that they may not even realize there's an online paper that they haven't found. So
brilliant.
The concept of pollinating and sharing these ideas and sending Substack subscriptions to someone.
I love it.
You might not take them out to dinner, but maybe go spend $50 for a year's subscription to a local online. So.
No, I think it's so incredibly important. And I just shared on my Substack today, I wrote a post called "Thank You for Not Smoking Fox," and I just shared what Jen Sanko, the filmmaker of The Brainwashing of My Dad's mother, did to bring her father back to his original self. She changed the channel. She deleted Fox. She never fixed the AM radio that broke so he could no longer listen to Rush Limbaugh. She unsubscribed him from all those junk email lists that were sending him anti-democratic propaganda. And she then subscribed him to pro-democracy lists. And her father came back within weeks, just like Ruth Ben-Ghiat's mother came back within days after the UK got rid of RT, and she then started watching BBC. She went from voting for Brexit to regretting it. She went from being pro-Putin to thinking he was a very bad man because they changed the channel. So that's another theme that we're working with over at RadPod. Yes, Hi-Fi.
Well, the other thing we need to talk about is there's a problem. Some people call it legacy media. Some people call it corporate media. I prefer to think of it as billionaire media, but the way they cover these.
Absolutely.
This is huge.
Yeah. So great segue, Hi-Fi. So, and great call. Yes. So how does anyone know anything? I'm not trying to be meta here, but it has to do with where you get information, right? And none of us are in Ukraine. None of us are really fully understanding the world around us. We process it. And right now there's a very big reliance on billionaire media. right?
Mhm.
We'll call it. Thank you. High five. But the remaining titans of legacy media, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post, have outsized influence, generally speaking, also because there's been a decimation of local news. So people are now relying more and more for the stories. The New York Times is a $2 billion a year organization with 1,900 journalists, but its political desk and its op-ed pages and how it covers stories is right now, unfortunately, promoting at best the status quo, and certainly, if you look in greater detail, from enabling and reinforcing white supremacy. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's very quickly just look at the front pages. The front pages of these papers is what their editorial boards and their leaders every day get together and decide what are their priorities for that day. Now we talk about the very important story that Rupert Murdoch came out explicitly that he is actually running an organization that spreads lies and actually is partisan to the point of where he is willing to, quote, do anything to help in Georgia. That should be scandalous, period. So how did different news organizations cover this the day after this story broke? We'll go left to right. We've got the New York Times did not think that was a front page story. And we'll give you a follow-up, nor the next day, nor the next day, nor the next day. So this wasn't, they were saving a gigantic half above the fold story. It is a non-story to the New York Times. The Wall Street Journal, owned by Rupert Murdoch, felt they could not pass on this story. And in their little one-liner, they did mention that the hosts had some discomfort telling things they didn't think were totally truthful. They didn't use the word lie, but at least it's a story worth mentioning on the front page.
Just
The
a little
below the fold.
Below the fold, you got to read, you know, it's like 10th down from the top, but it is there.
Yeah.
Washington Post, to its credit, did put it on the front page. They didn't use much of the explicit language that was used, meaning like these were lies. I think he was saying we're telling things we know are not true.
Right.
But they did put it sizable thing. We'll give them a B+. But here's an example of the Minnesota Star Tribune, not legacy media, not trying to reach the maximal audience inclusive of Republicans, just doing maybe a more accountable to their local community, put it on the front page, and they said Fox hosts knowingly pushed election lies. Holy mackerel, truthful language, front page, A+. So just to give the concept, I'm sorry, I just want to give you the spectrum.
I'm going to go A- because it's below the fold. Sorry.
Yeah. So, but
I'm a stickler.
I mean, to their credit, it's front page, and they have they have local news probably above the fold. You know, the high school student story is important to their community. But I will say that one of the great lines that I always use, I use it probably in everything I write, is the normalization warriors are part of the fascist creep. Now, everybody who reads me knows that periodically I bring up the Munich Times, a newspaper during World War II, predated Hitler's rise. They never stopped reporting on him. Nothing could, they were like dog with bone. They always reported on him. They never stopped. And it's like our legacy media, corporate media, billionaire owned media, they have been allies to the fascist creep this entire time. For the last 7-8 years, I will never forget in 2016, my former hiking partner, when I asked her who she was voting for, and she was confused. And this is a liberal woman. She was just like, well, Benghazi, I don't know. She didn't even know what Benghazi was, okay? Her boyfriend watched Fox. She would just hear the word Benghazi. This is propaganda. And it has been nonstop. It's been tube-fed, what our friend Zarina Zabriskie calls, tube-fed brainwashing sludge that's just been nonstop. And I'm very grateful to the grassroots efforts and to our allies that never stop pointing out the normalization and the words that are always misused. It's very, very important. I don't know if we can go to the Ron DeSantis Twitter thread.
Yeah, I actually need to talk about this fascist creep. because this fascist creep bothers the shit out of me.
Well, that's actually turning it into a noun and not a verb, which is easy to do.
It works on many levels.
It does.
Right?
Okay, so tell us what you do here as part of what Fixed Media Now does. I know that you rewrite headlines, and I find it to be very effective, and so do many of the media allies that we've formed along the way.
So great. So there's several of us in our group. I'll use the we specifically, that take the opportunity when given to us by articles or pieces in billionaire legacy media, and break them down with a different frame, one that doesn't reinforce the status quo, and one that would actually potentially speak what we consider center truthful language, minimize euphemism, and actually also speak up to threats to democracy. So, for example, here is a tweet that our community did. Specifically, the New York Times had a piece on Ron DeSantis several weeks ago, and the original title was "DeSantis takes on the education establishment and builds his brand."
That is a dereliction of duty.
And the problem is there's often a misconception that the headline, there's a lot of understandable, we have a lot of sympathy for journalists, deadlines, editors are making these decisions, a lot of journalists don't write these headlines, but many of the pieces we actually go through and dissect the piece itself. So it's not that we're picking on a headline that the journalist hasn't done. I just want to be clear. And we're doing this to do several fold. We're doing this to help people see with a different set of lenses how corporate media frames narrative by their editorial choices and the consequence of doing so, enabling fascist creep. So we reframed that slightly. I'm sorry, High Five, if you wouldn't mind popping back to that one for those in case they can't see it on the screen or they're just listening. But we reframed this building a brand specifically to explain that he's actually, I think our reframe was, DeSantis attacks freedom and equity in education and builds his brand as a fascist.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. He's trying to outflank Trump to the right, and Trump now has become the center of these of the GOP, because the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the DeSantises have moved so far to the right. So to your point, I'm going, pretty soon it's going to be 40 years that I've been a journalist. I started, young, and have always in one form or another been a reporter. And I've always believed that we're supposed to be biased, and that bias is truth. We're not supposed to not inform people on what the truth and the facts are. And I blame Roger Ailes for this both sides and bullshit, because he really did create quite a cancer on truth in our country. But I want to quote something. I took Trump's 2024 announcement speech and I ran it through a filter of Jason Stanley's How Fascism Works, because I wanted to show people that behind these words are actual blocks of narrative structure, chapters, unreality, the mythic past, victimhood, all that stuff. But the thing that I wrote that I go back to all the time that reassures me is one sentence where I wrote, with the disgraced, twice impeached former President Donald Trump now back in the ring, pro-democracy reporters are now facing whiplash as corporate media outlets continue to platform him while failing to confront the fact that their outdated ideas of journalistic impartiality are failing the very people they're meant to serve. And that was me being vitriolic, because I was watching them say, oh, Trump's the 2024 candidate, not the guy who tried to overthrow your country. That's a fact. The guy who lied for profit to make $250,000 off his big lie. Not any of that, not disgrace, not twice impeached, not, of trying to throw a violent coup, not the guy who knew that the people who were behind the violent coup were armed. It's just like, oh, former President Donald Trump announces, and that was me erupting with fury. Their outdated ideas of journalistic impartiality are failing the very people they're meant to serve.
I
Fourth
wish they'd
estate.
start calling him Russian asset Donald Trump.
Well, that's true. Of course. Yeah, that's true too. Many of us do. But so I feel like using better words, knowing that these old frameworks don't work when we are right now trying very hard to prevent this authoritarian capture. And we're doing it while we're in a cognitive warfare. And if media is not choosing better words, then we are going to be, continue to be in a world of hurt. So speaking of which,
Let's talk about some shitty words.
Yeah, before we let you go, let's take a look at this.
But one of the quick things just to emphasize, so thank you for that. Exactly right. The problem is it's not just words. And I know you're not saying it is, but for folks who are kind of new to the subject of media criticism, this isn't just a thesaurus that someone's choosing a synonym for one word or another and making a choice. They're making editorial decisions that frame narrative and understanding. Marjorie Taylor Greene is literally a Christian nationalist fascist who would gladly end democracy if she had the power, and is now a very important factor driving the Republican Party's agenda. And she is not being described as a threat to democracy. There's this bizarre cognitive dissonance of we have a First Amendment and a Fourth Estate, and yet legacy media is not understanding that some of the people they are covering as prominent are actually literally, if they carry out their agenda, will end our democracy as we know it. And it's really frustrating to see word choices is what we use to highlight that misunderstanding. So for example, this is a quick piece that we had done a dissection of. The New York Times front page attempted to do a discussion about sexism in the Republican Party. Instead, this piece used the word sexism only 3 times in the entire piece, and actually made it about views on sexism in the Republican Party. So as opposed to getting prominent Republican women to talk about sexism in the party, they actually asked Marjorie Taylor Greene for a comment. So this basically means that there's these authors and journalists in the New York Times thought of the person that they'd like to get a perspective of on sexism in the Republican Party as someone who is literally a Christian nationalist fascist. That is normalization. Why does the New York Times want to inform its readers of what someone who as overt with her anti-democratic values, why does that serve the New York Times?
As somebody who asked for a pardon when she was only a congresswoman for a couple of days, she preemptively asked for a pardon because she was part of fomenting an insurrection, which is a nice word for trying to overthrow our country. If I sound pissed, it's because I am. I wrote a similar article. I called mine "The Fascists Have No Clothes," and I showed how the words they use, the gesticulations that they use, how this is all part of a very specific fascist playbook. Learn it, read Jason Stanley's book, and find out exactly how they are doing this stuff, chapter and verse. I got 3 more points I'd like to make or have him address before we go. Yes.
One quick one. One of our we've actually remade the Washington Post motto. Number 1, democracy dies in neutrality. An alternative, democracy dies in euphemism. That's all.
That's wonderful. I love that. Democracy dies in neutrality. That's really great.
I just want to go with democracy dies when milquetoast journalists don't do their fucking jobs.
Thank you. Thank you.
Add it to the list.
Yours is a little shorter, though.
We can have a pick list.
It's probably more palatable. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You can have the audience vote. You guys should run a poll.
There we go. Poll time.
Yes. I'm going to remind everybody to read my Confessions of a Fox Blonde if they want to know why I get so passionate about this subject, because I was in that system for a while and it was an interesting journey. But, here we are, authoritarian capture at our doorstep, and our media is complicit in normalizing it and downplaying it and being dismissive of it. 3 quick things. And maybe we just have to bring you back for a part 2, but let's get some call to action. So Gigi Sohn, what can people do there?
Great. So good news. Part of the solution to the information, disinformation ecosystems that are around us is we need better regulation of media ownership and get better broadband and democratize media. Gigi Sohn's been renominated, and call your senators, no matter how progressive or Democratic or Republican leaning, and lean on them to advance Gigi Sohn through committee. We need her on the FCC, which is right now basically relatively ineffectual until it is actually operational with the 3-2. Joe Biden nominated Gigi Sohn October 2021.
Yeah.
So we've been listless at the FCC.
Right.
And I would like to point out one thing real fast, and I totally agree with her. Dark money is opposing her joining the FCC. Fuck yeah, it is.
That's absolutely true. And also net neutrality. Remember when that was a thing? Remember how corporations are going to own the future of the internet if we don't democratize it and prevent them to, that net neutrality thing? That still hasn't been resolved, and that needs to be resolved. And it's actually, we're running out of time. It will soon be the end of net neutrality, which is basically anti-democratic control of information. So it's a big deal. And Gigi Sohn would actually help bring back net neutrality. She's an advocate for net neutrality.
Call your senators, apply pressure. Sunlight on this stuff is very helpful. So thank you for that. Your organization has a screening coming up with Andrea Chalupa and her film, Mr. Jones. Can you give us a quick hit on that?
Absolutely. We love journalism. We love democracy. We support democracy in Ukraine. We love Andrea's work with Gaslit Nation. She wrote an incredible screenplay about how information and disinformation played a role in the Holodomor and Stalin's genocidal kind of history of Stalin's USSR. And we're going to screen that over Zoom this Saturday. Pardon me, and Saturday the 25th, 7:30 Eastern time. We'll drop a link. And afterwards, we're going to do a Q&A with Andrea and discuss the film itself, but also, and it is a historical-based film, but also discuss what kind of parallels we see now in information media ownership and authoritarianism. And just as an aside, as a shout out to the Kyiv Independent, there's going to be no admission, but for folks who can, we're going to ask people to chip in and donate through Patreon to the Kyiv Independent, which is a local media source in Ukraine. So once again, democracy depends on good local journalism.
Fantastic. And I lied because before I let you go, I want you to do a quick hit on the racist hijacking of Black control of courts in Mississippi. This is a story that's falling under the radar, and just inform our viewers on one or two lines on what they need to know about that.
Sure. In Mississippi, there has been state, which is dominant by white politicians, a strategic move to usurp the power of Black elected officials and judges in Mississippi. There have been multiple pieces written on it, but the challenge is when the New York Times gets a hold of this story, they fail to center that there is racism involved in this. Mm-hmm. And remember, although it's the Washington Post's alternate motto, democracy dies in euphemism. This is actually anti-democratic white supremacy in Mississippi, literally going at it to undermine the future and autonomy of Black politicians in Mississippi. But the New York Times runs with a headline, and the entire piece is even worse, calls them racial divides, and as opposed to racism in Mississippi. Or anyway, there are plenty of other alternatives, but folks need to check out and compare. In that tweet thread, we also talk about how the Washington Post, +1, did do a better analysis of the actual stakes and talked about racism.
Good.
Specifically at play.
And for those who want to read journalists who use real words and don't try to misdirect people, I did an incredible piece with David Pepper. I sound arrogant, but I'm not trying to be. David Pepper is why the piece is incredible. Jim Crow 2.0 byline supplement on all the techniques that are being rebooted from the 1800s to suppress vote, and how alarming it is that they are using these same racist, white supremacist voter suppression techniques born out of the white supremacists in the 1800s, and they're rebooting them right now in America. The return of the Jim Crow backlash to a diverse America. And if you can, support Byline Supplement, because that is where we are doing fiercely independent investigative reporting. Thanks for pulling that up, Hi-Fi. I have two more things, and we're going to go. One is that we never assume anybody knows some of the language we use, even words as specific as fascism. We're starting to use more boilerplate languages. And I just want to explain to people who may not know, a euphemism is a mild or indirect word or expression substituted for one considered to be too harsh or blunt. And I'm sorry, but we're in an information warfare, and we better start using blunt words so people understand and not trying to be polite. Ruth warns of this self-censorship. She warns of the politeness, like it's impolite to mention the insurrection. We're supposed to memory hole the attempted overthrow of our government. Not here, not on RadPod, not with the work that you do. That's not how we roll. So last thing, speaking of which, you are also allied with the group Truth Over Fox, which you can find at Truth Over Fox on Twitter. And they stand outside the Fox propaganda factory every Tuesday. And what did they do today?
They're a phenomenal group of folks. They actually got a truck that actually, in bright colors and
amazing
Fox lettering, basically did a demonstration. Fox lies have consequences. The messaging is tight. That's the News Corporation in the background. We think of that as the Fox propaganda factory. That's literally where some of the shows, although Tucker is safe in his, estate up in Maine seaside when he phones in his shows. But the reality is this is the end, the heart of the Fox propaganda empire. And these folks are out there every Tuesday. So if you're in New York City on a Tuesday at noon, Gesundheit.
Sorry.
Or if you are still on Elon Musk's Twitter, follow them at Truth Over Fox and amplify their stuff. They also have low-cost merch. So if you really want to flex at your next family gathering that you think Fox lies, they have Fox Lies t-shirts and Fox Lies hats. It's a great conversation starter. If you go for a jog for 2 hours a day and you run in your t-shirt that says Fox Lies, guarantee you will have a conversation starter.
I think that is so fantastic. And let's let our vice president have the very last word. She just said over the weekend, the United States has formally determined that Russia has committed crimes against humanity. And I say to all those who have perpetuated these crimes and to their superiors who are complicit in these crimes, you will be held to account. I like to add Russian propagandists to that, because we have an infection of that here in America. And I would like to think that these propagandists perpetuating harms on the minds of all of us who aren't inoculated to this stuff, I would like to think that there is going to be a time when they will be held to account as well. Milo, thank you so much. You rock.
Hey, no, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for the work you're all doing, an opportunity to kind of talk about media. It's just that giant invisible thing, this tractor beam of minds that's like you can't see, but you feel it. And like, it's so great to talk about it with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time, and we can encourage everybody to follow Milo and his activist team at Fix Media Now. And all the links are already in the show, and we're going to put them also online when we post this breaking news special. Hi-Fi, thank you so much for all that you do. And Milo, onward and upward. Thank you for being our media correspondent.
The United States has formally determined that Russia has committed crimes against humanity. And I say to all those who have perpetrated these crimes and to their superiors who are complicit in these crimes, you will be held to account. In the face of these indisputable facts, to all of us here in Munich, let us renew our commitment to accountability. Let us renew our commitment to the rule of law.